So it seems we're live. So hello everyone, and welcome to another expert session number 103. Just before we start, I need to go with our incredible sponsors. So do some sponsor recognition here. Talk a little bit about them. So first off, VTech's commerce platform powering global retail experiences. Then Airmeet, platform enabling our global virtual and hybrid events. AI Foria, supporting the development of intelligent systems and next generation AI applications. What is Evolve? Well, Evolve operates as an orchestrating layer between board level leaders, non-executive directors, senior advisors, VC capital and family offices, high growth companies, commerce companies. We bring these actors into ongoing structured conversations where decisions, trade-offs, and market dynamics are examined from multiple sides of the table. So this is not content, this is how perspective compounds. Our expert today is Gordon Robson, a serial entrepreneur who has built, scaled, and exited multiple companies across telecom, media, and technology. His experience spans private markets, public markets, and strategic acquisitions. He has taken companies from early stage uncertainty to IPO and navigated transactions with large institutional buyers. So founders who have built once often optimize for growth. Founders who have built, scale, and exited multiple times begin to optimize for optionality. What to build, when to scale, when to hold, when to sell. So these are not linear decisions. And Gordon is currently building in AI, where execution cycles are compressing the relationship between product capability and distribution in shifting again. Alongside this, he writes Dreams of Electric Sheep, where he explores how technology is reshaping systems, decision making, and economic structures. So um, I have also a co-host, like a last minute co-host, but someone that we've been developing a great relationship, Stuart, who owns an agency. So he's on the service side of things. And Gordon, I always start these sessions with a controversial opening question.
Mhm.
So the controversial opening question for you is, after your first exit, are you building better companies or are you simply building companies that are easier to sell?
I don't think any company is necessarily easy to sell, to be honest. Um, in fact, I'm thinking of the companies I've basically sold. Legion, which was one we sold to Lagardère. You've got a relatively small company being sold to a large global group, and it can be massively time consuming. It ends up sort of costing you a fortune in lawyers. On another occasion, we had Telstra, the Australian telco, who were very excited about what we were doing in Australia, try to buy us. We went through months of sort of sitting with lawyers with them. They sent people over, and the whole thing became hugely frustrating because what happened was that we would sort of in long sessions during a day, we would agree sort of various terms, etc. They would go back and report to Sydney overnight and then come back and say, no, we can't agree to that. And it was like, well, why can't you get decision makers here? So that was hugely frustrating. We did a joint, we sold minority stake to in one company to a large South African media group. That wasn't too bad. So kind of in answer to your question, no sort of company sale is actually ever easy. People always say we're going to get this done really quickly, and it never ever happens that way. So I think, yeah, no, I mean the answer is you build a company, you want to sell it, but it's never easy. It's never straightforward. It can be very painful. I mean, another business we sold, just to sort of finish on this, which is another lesson that you learn, was we sold a small business that we set up to a German company that sort of basically said, right, we're going to make sure that you achieve a huge earnout here. And then I think they worked out that basically the earnout was going to be so expensive to them, they effectively blocked our ability to hit the earnout. So, never ever again would I actually sell a business with an earnout unless it was sort of guaranteed or there was no way for them to block it. So I guess what I'm saying is selling a company is never easy, despite what people say. It's very expensive. It's very time consuming. And you learn a lesson from every sale that you do along the way. How does that?
Thanks. Yeah, that's a brilliant answer. And what I perhaps like to ask you as a follow-up question is, do you think every business should have an exit in mind, or should we also think of businesses where we can make a living? And I'm not talking about lifestyle business. I think it's more like, I think there's an idea. I
I
don't know.
think I think the
Yeah.
answer to that is, um, if you don't have external shareholders and you want to basically run a business as a lifestyle business, then fine. But if you are raising funds, from investors, one of the first questions that an investor asks is, well, where's my exit? Where am I going to see my value? So,
Mm.
it really depends on the business that you're buying. But I mean, typically what we've always done is we've built businesses, and sort of sold them. So everyone does well. I'm just saying it's not easy.
So perhaps another follow-up question to that, and it's I think the idea, maybe I never raised capital. Like it
Hmm.
has always been bootstrap, but I never built gigantic things like you did as well. But the idea of raising money also, in my opinion, it's a liability, because there's this narrative, oh, how cool it is to raise capital, but essentially you have a debt, and the company or fund or whoever is giving you money, like they expect the 10x return, right? So
Hmm.
your views on raising capital and the whole narrative out there.
I mean, we've also largely bootstrapped businesses, which is good, or
Mhm.
had a few extra. I mean, I the problem, first of all, with the PLC is you raise investment. As I said to you, you've got these institutions on your back constantly.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, one of the things that was really frustrating was that we would go through like a quarter where basically we would beat our target by, I don't know, 10-15%. And they would say, oh, they've just hit their target, or just, and then you would occasionally have an odd quarter where you would just marginally miss, and it would be a complete disaster. And you'd think, well, hang on, this isn't really right, because the business is still, doing well. So one thing you always want to do with external shareholders, particularly PLC, but not just with PLC, is manage expectations. I mean, the worst thing that people can do when they raise money is effectively go out there and tell a big hyped up story in order to get the investment, because you're just creating a massive rod for your back down the track if you don't actually achieve those targets. You've got to be realistic. um,
Mhm.
so yeah, I mean, managing investors, which is something which, to be honest, is always, every business has been fundamentally my role, um, is can be a nightmare. You just got to do it very carefully, very honestly. I think honesty is absolutely critical thing when you've got external investors, and also communicate with them. If you give regular updates, it's just if you go
Mhm.
kind of quiet and they think, well, what's happening?
Yeah.
So in other words, be proactive. Give them regular updates without them having to ask for them, and it's really important to keep them on side.
Stuart, do you have any perhaps? Yeah.
It's so for me, it's really interesting because we've got the two sides of our business. We've got the agency, so the Lemon Hive side, which generates cash. So that one's easy. But then with Site Beacon, so it's an internal tool that ended up rolling out into its own product. And we've got a clear roadmap for how we're going to improve it. But I mean, it's a question, Gordon, really.
Mm,
We could get away without investment, but maybe we could do more with investment. And I know SaaS products are difficult, but I mean, from my point of view, sorry, being a bit
mm.
selfish, what would you lean towards if you didn't have to get investment? Would you prefer that, or do you see that each time you've got investment, the acceleration has been worth it for changing your job role?
What I'd say to that is, at the moment, we are basically raising investment for, Quantilingual to scale. And it's the first time I've actually gone out to sort of raise investment for quite some time, and it's become so much harder, and the expectations of investors is so much greater than it was. I think, you know, the problem is that you've got a lot of people out there basically looking for investment, and I mean, the analogy I've kind of always used is it's a bit like the sort of old days in the music industry when you've got A&R guys, you know, in record companies basically looking for the next sort of Beatles or the, you know, U2 or whatever. And they're just trying to sift through everything that comes in, and it's just a complete minefield. I mean, we are dealing with personal contacts. I mean, if you go to some of these investment sites, VCs, etc., you know, upload your deck and we'll take a look at it. It's basically a bit like mailing an audio cassette in, and it sits in the mailbag, and it may or may not be listened to. In answer to your question, raising them, if you don't really need to, then, you know, I wouldn't do it. I mean, we're raising because we want to try and scale quicker, but at the same time, everything is pressing ahead. You know, so I mean, I'm kind of driving it, but it's not a distraction for all the tech guys. You know, so yeah, if you don't need it, I wouldn't go for it. And you know, and if you do, then do it through personal contacts. I mean, there are so many people, you must see this on LinkedIn, who basically call themselves investors, or you know, they're trying to sell lists. I mean, the guys who call themselves investors, I mean, I've talked to some of them, and actually you kind of realize what they're doing is they're looking for a good idea, and if they think they found something good, then they'll maybe go and talk to someone that might be able to put some money in. Something I was warned about some time ago in this day and age is a zombie investor. You know, if you're talking to a potential investor, ask them when they made their last investment and, you know, how big it was. And if they haven't made an investment in the last sort of 6 months or whatever, if not even sooner than that, then they're not serious. You know. And the other thing, I mean, someone talked to me about this morning. They're looking at buying lists of investors for, like, I don't know, £96 or £100 or something. You know, I mean, you don't need to do that. You know, it's just a money-making ruse. So yeah, I'm very, very skeptical. So in answer to your question, if you don't need to, I wouldn't do it. Wouldn't go there. Sorry, it's a very
Brilliant.
cynical response. You know?
No,
Perfect. Yeah.
yeah. I like to. I've broken down this conversation into a few topics. So first off, it's about building across cycles, and you've built multiple companies there and sold multiple companies. So the question I had then for you is more like, what did you stop doing after your first exit, Gordon? Yeah. Are you more risk averse, less risk averse nowadays? What changed?
No, I'm not. I mean, to be honest, I'm just always looking for. I kind of think I've always been ahead of the field in terms of what's happening and looking for the next thing. I mean, right back to, as I said, I mean, I was the one who basically invented the whole concept of media using telephony, you know, phone voting. What we did with the iPad was very, very innovative, and I mean, Apple loved it. Basically, I've got some music business connections I've had, and I know Patty Boyd well, who, as I said, was, you know, married to George Harrison, Eric Clapton, and her biography. I said, look, maybe what we could do with the iPad is make this sort of interactive. And so, I mean, what she did one day was she said to me, look, here's a box with all my sort of memoirs and everything from being with George and with Eric. Do you want to have a look through it? Which for me was like unreal as a big Beatles, you know, sort of Clapton fan. And I was going through it, pulling out all these letters and, you know, all this sort of stuff. And then what we did was we took her biography and we basically made it completely interactive in the iPad. So you could listen to tracks, you could watch videos, you could read letters, all that sort of stuff. Apple loved it. It was a great sort of showcase for what the iPad could do. The Sunday Times did a big feature on it. And then we did a similar thing with Kevin Godley. Moving forward, you know, we're in AI, but basically what we are doing is really focused on the whole sort of voice first thing. So, you know, we've got, like, for example, if you were interested in investing in Quantilingo, we've got something we call Brandon, which is multilingual AI agent, and you can have a chat with Brandon, sort of say, well, tell me about Quantilingual. Why should I invest in Quantilingual, etc., etc. So it's a kind of 24/7 multilingual sort of salesperson. One of the things we've been talking to one fund about is having something like this where they can effectively filter founders looking for investment. This came through one of the conversations we've been having. It typically takes, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, maybe a bit longer, for a fund to have a chat with a founder looking for investment, and sort of try and work out if there's something there. They really just don't have the time to do lots of them. It's typically the same questions they ask all the time. So basically what we've been asked to do is to put together, once again, a sort of an AI agent where the founder can call this. They will be asked the questions as if they're talking to the investor. They answer the questions, then basically their answers will be scored, and depending on the score, which is then sent to the investor, they can decide whether or not they want to proceed. So I mean, they're just a couple of examples of the sort of thing that we're doing that I don't really think we're not aware of anyone else doing this. And as I said, we just focus. And also, one of the great things about the multilingual side is it will automatically detect the language you're speaking. So you don't need to sort of say, "Can you speak Portuguese?" You just start talking in Portuguese, and it will immediately, pick up that's a language you're speaking in. So that's kind of, so just driven to basically sort of, capitalize on and do something with the next thing where we think the world is going.
Mm-hmm. And so I think the first time we spoke, we spoke about this voice technology. So you're playing with the you're giving people access so you can understand also where the use cases are. Do I understand?
Yeah, I mean,
correctly?
one of the other things that, I mean, if you talk to a sort of an AI agent,
Yeah.
one of the first big giveaways is the latency, because
Mhm.
typically what everyone is doing is they do speech to text to speech and then back again.
Mhm.
And that slows everything down. Whereas what we've done is we're very much focused on speech to speech. So it flows much, much better. I mean, the first sort of showcase that we did was, funnily enough, with a sort of world famous psychic medium guy called Craig Hamilton Parker. Has got a massive YouTube sort of channel and following. And we created what we call Craig's Oracle. And basically, it's completely personalized. It's highly curated. So, I mean, he gave us a sort of brief as to, what areas he wanted it to cover, where it would get all its information from. And so people basically subscribe, and they can have a 15-minute chat with the Oracle. They can talk to it about sort of issues, whether it be, I don't know, spiritual issues, personal issues, or whatever. They get a transcript of their conversation. And I mean, we got one guy who's he's an American, but he's in Japan, and he's basically paying us $300 a month for sort of unlimited access to this. So we got some really sort of, and even though they know it's an AI, I mean, they really kind of get into it. We had to switch. We switched it to our own another one of our own platforms a few weeks ago and said, look, this is going to be down potentially for a few hours. And a couple of people were like, when's it back? When's it back? Even though we told them, so people really get hooked in these things. So yeah, I mean, it's just constantly sort of, trying to stay ahead of the field. The other thing I'd say about AI, which is what we've tried to do, is to avoid getting into sectors where we know the big guns are going to be. I mean, this time last year, we launched thing we called Connect, which was basically a one-to-one video call where two people could be speaking completely different languages. You chose the language you wanted to speak, and then the call would be translated in real time. And it actually works very, very well. But we sort of people saying to us, this is great, can you integrate this in Teams, etc. And we thought, the reality is that, Google and Zoom and whatever, they're all going to do this. So we kind of took that experience and moved on. And I said, what we're now trying to do is focus on sort of niche sectors, tying up specific clients that we have contracted with good relationships with, so that we know we're kind of protected. So I mean, in the AI world, it's all basically about building moats and not trying to do something that's easily copied.
Agreed. I think that has a lot to do with the recent discussions of go-to-market that we had. We had in London. You couldn't attend to the event. Stuart also.
Sorry.
But I think essentially it's about not being compared to an existing solution, because if you go into the comparison game, it invariably you're gonna be, having a pricing discussion, and you don't want to be there, right? As let's say a company that is building something. So, Stuart, any remarks on that, or building an agency, building your moat?
Yeah, I mean, with agency building a moat, it's difficult because we went out into headless decoupled, thought that the world would move quicker towards it. So we thought we had a differentiation there. And then there's always the catch of the world doesn't quite come your way as quickly as you're thinking, because our engineering team is set up in a way that we can build quicker. So that's the only thing on moat from the agency, that it was great. Like the Blue Ocean book's brilliant, but sometimes it can take a little bit longer to come your way when the customers are sort of waiting. I think, with the economic situations that have been going on, we're obviously seeing lower capex, or at least I'm hoping it's down to that. But that's the only thing from our moat. We thought we'd built a great one. Still waiting for it to move more towards us, but I think it will come. Like from my background, I know where it'll go. And on the AI thing, I think it's really interesting for us on Site Beacon, because obviously we are going through a process of trying to gather the data. And Gordon, I'm sure you've done this, where you our idea is to gather really good data before we apply AI. And that's where investment is slowing us down, because we know we can do some really good things, but I don't know how you're approaching it. But do you think that gathering, one of the defenses is gathering data, or gathering a thing that differentiates you as well?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, as you said, gathering and utilizing data, basically sort of good contractual relationships. I mean, one thing I've always done, I mean, I'm still, I've got contact with people I worked with like 20, 30 years ago, and you keep relationships going, because if you've got a good relationship with someone and you're delivering, they're not going to go elsewhere. So that's absolutely critical. And then, as I said, the other thing is not to get into something that, one of the big guns is basically just going to blow you away with, I mean, there is, sort of multilingual act. I mean, like, for example, if you've got AirPods, Apple will enable, sort of translation, which you can hear. But it's very much sort of consumer orientated. It's like, if you're in Spain or something and you order a cup of coffee, whereas what we also can do is to actually effectively train an LLM to with sort of 4 specific sectors, so it will actually understand. I mean, one case we had was we were talking to a fashion designer in the UK, who basically has got sort of Italian designers but Chinese manufacturers, and they did a call which was really clever between sort of Italian and Mandarin. And they were coming back and saying, well, look, it works really well, but actually some of the terms, were not being picked up. So therefore, that's where you can get into you've got to get into basically sort of training the LLM, fine tuning it, which is something that, the big guns are not going to do. So, I mean, like, as I said, I mean, with our Craig's Oracle, we use ChatGPT 5.4, I think it is, but it's very much curated, very much trained. Whereas, for anyone out there who uses ChatGPT, I mean, they've just got the sort of whole sort of thing. It's not curated at all.
Still on perhaps some trends and what you're seeing there, because I think first how our relationship actually started is because of an AI voice company that we introduced you to and talked about them. We took them to Brazil, built an advisory board, and when they showed us what they were capable of doing, I was really, it was like mind blowing, because even the in Brazil we have multiple accents, like in Britain, you know.
Yeah.
So if you go to the countryside of Brazil, like we say carne in São Paulo, like beef, and like in the countryside of São Paulo, people would say carne, like you know, there's a nar that it's a bit more
Yeah.
pronounced, and so that was really interesting. It was like, wow, this is powerful, right? Because if you had this AI voice technology calling you and really impersonating the local accent, it was quite interesting to see. Now, you mentioned something about perhaps, I think it was for podcasting, like use cases of AI voice technology. And I mentioned, I think I saw an interview of Stephen Bartlett at the at
Sorry,
some
the
major
CEO.
conference.
All right. Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, but he was speaking about, they've been testing AI voice to to translate what he's already doing in, for example, in Spanish, which is this, I believe, after English. So you have Mandarin, English, and Spanish as probably the third most spoken language in the world. And now he's having a massive audience that he was missing, because they've been testing. So for podcasters, that can be quite powerful. So in your case, do you guys also intend to possibly have your technology for podcasters and content creators? And
Yeah, that's very much where we're going. A couple of things on that. One is, first of all, in terms of sort of dialects. I mean, we also operate in the Philippines, where, I mean, I guess like Brazil, I mean, there's so many different dialects and variations. We are completely LLM agnostic at the moment. So, like, for example, DeepSeek is much, much better in Asia than here. So we can sort of switch LLM, core LLM as need be. The other thing that we've recently cracked is voice cloning. We're actually about to launch a version of Craig's Oracle for his YouTube, which has got his voice. That has, I mean, literally, I don't know, 6 months ago, everyone was looking at 11 Labs thinking, wow, your voice cloning, incredible. And actually, to be quite honest, on that area now, I think we can do what they can do. And you can get a perfectly acceptable voice clone with literally just a sort of 20-second clear clip of someone speaking. So it's getting better. So I think when it comes to podcasts, also, not just can you use AI, but you can, potentially use a clone of the podcaster.
Sweet, fantastic. Yeah, I would like to ask you about advisors, and just to we are on 28 minutes, around 30, 35. We have our members joining in and asking you questions. But yeah, more like about a topic that is central here to evolve. Advisors, NEDs, boards are often brought into a company with unclear expectations. So, at what stage do advisors become valuable, and how do you even attract advisors to your businesses, if you do?
I mean, advisors can become useful right from basically the sort of creation, of the business, particularly if you're sort of even fundraising, you're trying to find customers, introductions, etc., etc. I mean, you need to basically bring in someone who's actually really enthusiastic about what you're doing. So, I mean, we in the past have had, especially the PLC, you bring in a sort of an NED, and actually we had a couple that basically didn't last long because they just were kind of doing it, for a sort of a fee, and basically sort of like, well, I'm an NED of, I don't know, 3 or 4 companies. So they've got to be really enthusiastic. They've got to be you've got to know exactly what it is you want them to achieve, and they've got to buy into that. And then, I mean, we've actually in the past had one advisor in particular who invested, a bit of money in the business. So, they got some skin in the game. That really helps too. But
Brilliant.
the answer is, I mean, you could, even right from the point of concept, there can be a case for having, an advisor. Also, to be honest, it can actually really help if you are raising investment when people see the sort of people that have bought into, are prepared to put their name to your business.
And in your years building and selling companies, have you always had advisors? And how
No, not necessarily. I mean, with PLC we did. I mean, when we were going to list the PLC, we brought in a former MD of Vodafone as the chairman, which actually really helped in terms of investment, because he wouldn't put his name to it unless he really believed in it. But no, I mean, only bring in advisors if they, add real value and they're really committed.
Stuart, yeah, for sure. Do you have advisors, by the way, Stuart?
No, not with this one. With my previous agency, so SEO agency, we did. It was useful. Currently, we don't. I mean, SiteBeacon is obviously very new, small, and Lemon Hive is simple. It's not the sort of thing that needs an advisor. I think just at the minute, I guess as we grow, maybe certainly when it brings strength in the areas that I'm weak in or trying to cover, that's where I find it very helpful when I'm trying to cover too many different areas and there's people who are just far better at it than me. So something like sales, if we could get a non-exec that's a bit more connected and a bit better. So that's where we would, but no, not at the minute.
Gustavo, does anyone wants to ask questions? I can see Hawan here. I can see Franz. Franz, you're welcome. Paulo, if you have questions, as always, you're very welcome to jump in. Yeah. In the meantime, I'll ask you about your newsletter, Gordon. But before the newsletter, you also strike me as someone who's into arts. You mentioned a couple of musicians there. In your WhatsApp picture, you have, it seems you like horses. So tell me a little bit about the newsletter, your passions as well, because I think that also has probably a big impact in how you see the world.
Yeah, I mean, the newsletter, Dreams of Electric Sheep, for anyone who is trying to work out what that's got to do with AI, Philip K. Dick wrote a novel way back called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And that became the movie Blade Runner. So that's where that came from. And I mean, he was way ahead of the game in terms of actually androids, human consciousness. I mean, consciousness is a big issue, and I've written about that. Can an AI ever be conscious? Well, it depends on how you actually define consciousness. If you think consciousness is in the brain or not. But that's a whole different subject that my wife is actually very, very heavily into. She's also very heavily into horses, which is why we've got 5 horses, and there's one that happens to be in the picture. But my background initially actually was very much the music. I mean, I was playing a variety of bands, wrote radio commercials, produced radio commercials before I kind of got into the sort of telecoms business. It's when I decided I better get a real job and actually try and make some money as opposed to making it as a musician, And I had a studio with some amazing vintage keyboards, which I parted with a few years ago, which I now kind of regret. The only thing I'd say is I parted with them to a band you might have come across called the 1975. And they bought my vintage keyboards, and then they used them on an album that won the sort of Brits that year. So so yeah, very much music, writing. I mean, I also for a while wrote a travel column for the London Evening Standard under the name of Frank Camel. So yeah, But no, I mean the newsletter, Dreams of Electric Sheep. It's on LinkedIn and it's also a Substack.
Mhm.
And I mean, the one I sent it to you, the one that I literally put out a couple of days ago is about grief bots, which is an
Yeah.
interesting area, which was inspired by two things. One is there's a drama here in BBC called The Capture, which is basically sort of effectively where they call it correction. They're basically faking. You can fake anything. So you've got sort of government sort of minister basically being interviewed on BBC TV, and he's sitting at home watching this, thinking, "Hang on, that isn't me," because the whole thing has been faked. And then more recently, which is global, is Amazon Prime's Scarpetta, where they've got an AI reconstruction of basically someone who died. You know, people can sit there and have a chat with her on the TV screen, and that made me think and looked into it. So we are heading. I mean, this is a massive ethical issue where basically, you can effectively take images of someone who's died. You can take a lot of content, you clone the voice, and put them up on a screen, and effectively, have conversations with them as if they're still there. And that's all possible today. Big ethical issue, I think.
No, for sure. And Paulo,
Mm,
forgive me, but just a segue to that, but
mm,
Paulo will ask his question. It's more like I think in Japan and maybe other countries, like they're already having sex with robots. Kind of like
mm,
you know, that's what I heard the other day. I was like, what the hell? People are, have you heard of this at all?
I, yeah, I mean, you see sort of clips on social media like TikTok or whatever with these stunning sort of female robots, and you kind of think, are they actually real or is this just fake?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, but I think it's kind of scary the way the world is going. I mean, I do think this whole thing about grief bots raises a lot of interesting questions. I mean, one of the questions I put in there was, well, what happens if one family member wants this and the other one doesn't? You know, um, and then of course there's the whole possibility of companies basically sort of effectively trying to use it as marketing. So you suddenly find you're chatting with grandma who tries to push you towards booking some, cruise, which you're thinking, where did
Mhm.
that come from? Because basically, it's product placement. There are some massive issues there, but it's
Yeah,
going to happen. You know.
for sure. I
Mm,
watched the Murdochs, the Murdoch series on Netflix. I'm not sure if you
mm,
guys watched it, but quite interesting also.
yeah.
Paulo, go ahead.
You guys talking about sex with robots and
You've lost your chain of thought.
yeah, let me bring let me
Let you
try
compose
to
compose yourself again. Yeah.
to compose myself here. You made me lost my ideas. But Gordon, something that I have been discussing. So, in addition to serve as a director here at FCAMER, I also advise a couple tech companies, or one is a startup and the another not so starting up. But
Hmm.
the question that's arising and is about the financial structure of tech businesses with the more stronger usage of the LLMs and
Hmm.
the tokenization of the application. So in
Mm.
some cases, some companies are struggling with aligning how they build the client and how they have the cost structure
Yeah.
with these users. I'd
Hmm.
like to hear from you. How do you see this, some sense of compatibilization and the challenges that tech businesses may face in this world days of sex with robots?
It's actually a big issue, um, because basically, if you that sort of wholesale price that companies like OpenAI charge smaller companies, as you said, for sort of tokens for use of their LLM, etc., makes it prohibitive. It's anti-competitive, effectively, if you want, because, you know, if you go directly through ChatGPT, you can, as a consumer, you can get a lot of usage, but not a lot of money. But if you went through a private company and had that same level of usage, it would cost the private company an absolute fortune. So two things. I mean, one is we charge a premium for our services and make sure they're really high quality, so we know we're actually making money. We're very much on top of it. And the other thing, to be honest, is what we are doing is building our LLMs. I mean, we've moved all our tech away onto basically our own sort of bare metal servers. So we are no longer, we were initially hosted with Azure, we no longer are. So we want to be completely sort of self-sufficient. And ultimately, you know, if you've got your sort of own LLM for specific, you know, sort of uses, then you're completely sort of clear of that. But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, the sort of wholesale charges make it completely unviable for a small company to charge consumers or whatever, unless they're actually charging a significant premium. Yeah, so it's a big issue.
Brilliant. Gustavo, any other questions here? Do we have, Hawan was here, probably has to leave. Franz, come on. Yeah. Gordon, you've built and sold multiple companies. How do you reconcile building something with real passion and then deciding to sell and walk away? And what do founders usually misunderstand about that moment?
I think, you know, I mean, you're not going to part with something unless the price is right. You know, you can buy a house, you can basically sort of renovate that house or build that house with massive, you know, passion. But then, you know, maybe there's time to sort of move on. You kind of think, all right, I've achieved that. I've gone as far as I can with this. And actually, typically the reason why a company will buy another company, and particularly, I mean, we've typically sold to bigger companies, is because they think, right, I can take what you've done and I can make it much, much bigger. So, you know, I don't really see, it's never been a problem. You know, you really get really committed. I mean, I'm one of these people that basically, I don't work 24/7, but I'm kind of available sort of 24/7, you know. So I really get stuck into something, but at the same time, you think, okay, now's the time maybe to sort of, you know, move on and do something else. I said it's a bit like building a house. So I don't think it's an issue particularly.
Thanks, Gordon. I like to pick your brain on perhaps some literature, and yeah, where do you pick your water? How, you know, what sort of stuff you read, and I find it very interesting. I think you mentioned some sci-fi there. I like your references. I think as I've grown older, I turned 40 last year, turning 41 this year. I'm becoming more and more interested into sci-fi, AI. You know, yeah, I find it fascinating what you mentioned about consciousness and all of these topics.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really read much fiction. It's mainly non-fiction, which is related to, you know, what I'm doing to get ideas, and also, so particularly at the moment working in AI, the sort of it's kind of incredible how you know, sort of, I don't know, even 50 years ago more, some of these authors were actually sort of writing about things that have, you know, are actually sort of happening now. It's like a lot of, you know, the sort of tech bros, as it were really heavily into Star Trek and, you know, that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, I always try and get something out of what I'm reading, as opposed to just reading as a bit of sort of light entertainment.
And in regards to building in AI, how things changed from the time you built your first company? Maybe it's an obvious question, but I mean, I'd like you to speak about the obvious in terms of executing your projects, in terms of how you're building a company today, what's changed in terms of headcount, in terms of, you know, yeah, building a company in 2026, you know, opposed to when you built your first company.
It's a lot. Well, first of all, basically our core team are largely people that we've known for quite some time, you know. So we haven't actually at the moment got into sort of recruiting anyone that, you know, we don't really know. So so that is good. One of the issues with AI is, we came across this, is it's very easy, if you kind of half know what you're doing, to build an impressive demo, but it's much, much more difficult to actually build something that really scales. And a lot of investors in AI were basically kind of blown away 2 or 3 years ago by companies who went to them and sort of said, hey, look at this. And they went, wow, you know, that's great. And they put money into it, and then it never went anywhere, because actually it was basically just a demo. And that's, you know, so a challenge we have is actually kind of persuading investors, people, that what we're doing is real. And of course, the best way to do that is to actually sort of show them that, you know, it is live, and, you know, how it's scaled and how it's being used. But I mean, when I started, there weren't really that many people sort of building their own, setting up their own business. It was kind of like, wow, that's kind of a weird thing to do. Whereas now everyone kind of thinks that, you know, they can be an entrepreneur. Another kind of analogy I also use, which doesn't really help the sector, is that back in the day, just sort of taking the music analogy, there were a lot of people who thought, you know, they kind of pick up a guitar and learn a few chords, or, you know, I don't know, House of the Rising Sun or something, and thought they were going to be the next sort of, you know, Jimmy Page, and they were going to kind of really make it. And the reality now is, I think we've got a lot of people who basically, rather than wanting to be a rock star, want to be a kind of tech entrepreneur rock star. I mean, what exactly is an entrepreneur, you know? So the market is really, really crowded with people who actually aren't helping, because the overall quality, I mean, obviously there's amazing people, but there's a lot of people out there that just, you know, are making decision making harder for customers, because they kind of get bombarded, and you think, well, you know, is how good are these people actually? Where, you know, so it's, I think sales is much harder. Another area I'd say is that back in the day, as it were, it was much easier to get to decision makers, whereas now you've got what we kind of call the middle management wall. Basically, you know, are very hard to get by. They're not decision makers, and they don't want to take risks, because, you know, if they do something and it works well, okay, you know, that's fine. But if it doesn't work well, then they could lose the job. You know? So it's not easy. It's definitely much harder. I mean, the relationships we typically built with customers we've got from sort of previous relationships. I mean, I've got a guy at the moment who's doing a brilliant job of helping us get customers in the US, and he's someone that I've known for a long time. You know, so I know he's well connected, completely trust him. So it's harder. I mean, also another issue I'd say which has changed is, you know, you used to be able to sort of shake hands on something, and then you knew that everyone would be kind of loyal and it would happen. And now, without wishing to be too cynical, you know, people will just kind of go cold, drop things without giving any reason, just go quiet, you know, so it can be much harder. And then what doesn't help, finally, and we'll all get this, is you get constantly bombarded, especially sort of from LinkedIn, by people who are trying to sell you things and connect, even though you have no idea who they are, and that doesn't help either. So I think the market is just way too crowded and cluttered with people all sort of, you know, hitting you with their supposed sales pitch.
Yeah, I mean that I'm biased because I own a community. You guys are part of it, but I think with everything that's going on, communities are going to become more and more important. Because, for example, when you watch a video on YouTube nowadays, there are some really, really good AI videos that I don't even know if they're like real anymore, you know? So if you're watching a YouTube shorts that you don't know if it's real, and talking about perhaps a change in behavior that you're saying there, I'm not sure if this is a generational thing or if it's just like people getting burned with, you know, like so many messages and this input that we have all the time. So I
Yeah,
think there's an opportunity there for real relationships and smaller groups and that
sure.
kind of stuff, you know.
Mhm.
But then that requires time and you know, how do you essentially build that? So So the aspect of selling that you're referring to, I find it really, really interesting. So in your opinion, or how do you go about selling? Is it all through the relationships you built throughout the years, and a relational selling,
That's
or
that's how you get things moving. Then once you get things moving, then it becomes easier. I mean, one of the big challenges also in selling anything that's AI at the moment is that most companies don't really understand it. They don't really see how it's going to fit in. There's a real fear that if they do some sort of AI deal, it will upset their employees because people are going to lose their jobs. And I think another big issue is it's moving so quickly. I think companies are really wary of committing to something at this stage because in 6 months' time it could be replaced by something else. So AI sales are actually kind of quite hard, especially if you're looking for sort of long-term commitments.
Stuart,
in terms of
yeah.
No, sorry.
Pardon. Go ahead. I interrupted you. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think what sort of started this whole thing about so many people thinking it could become a sort of, a sort of tech entrepreneur rock star was basically that period around sort of, I don't know, 2005, 6, 7 with Facebook and whatever, where suddenly you got guys like Mark Zuckerberg, sitting in his sort of room at Stanford, within a relatively short time and apparently not doing very much, becomes a billionaire. And I think suddenly everyone was like, wow, all I need to do is sort of come up with some idea and I'm going to be the next sort of Mark Zuckerberg. And I mean, also, it was like the number of people over the years that said to me, hey, I've got a great idea for an app. And the first question you say is, okay, so how are you going to get it out there? And it's like, well, people will find it. Well, I mean, if you look at the App Store, I would imagine today it's still the same. I haven't looked for a while, but pretty much all the sort of top 10 apps have been the top 10 apps for years, because, you just can't stick something out there and think it's going to be found. People don't really think it's what you were saying about the go-to-market, Anyway, another one of my ramblings.
I like them. Stuart, yeah, I was going to ask you, perhaps you have remarks there, but also about go-to-market, your views on sales, how things are changing, or if they haven't changed at all.
I think very much. So I started my first business back in 2000, early 2000s, different type of business, and then moved on to SEO and PPC. We started 2007, and Deloitte were a customer within the first year. M&G were a customer, Miele, and it was easy. And I know SEO was very popular at that time, but I thought headless would be similar. It's not. Like it's not. It's busier. It's harder to convince people. The messaging is harder. So I've certainly found it with Lemon Hive versus SEO optimized to be a much more difficult approach, much more people in the market. And we saw that with SEO. Like when we started, we were virtually the only guys who were there who could do it properly, who maybe Deloitte could go to, or there was 5 of us in the UK. Similar for headless, or decoupled, but again, people just aren't buying. So I do agree with Gordon that it's tougher. And then go to market with SiteBeacon. Again, I think we've got a good product, but we haven't really done it because we're not quite. We always want the next thing. I think we're quite clear now that as soon as we've added proper accessibility, website accessibility to it, then we're ready to go. So I don't know with SiteBeacon yet. We've tried a few little things and it's done okay, but we haven't ever really pushed it because we're not ready. And then on the AI thing, I think for us, AI is very interesting. We use it to help build software, but we would never rely on it. I mean, SiteBeacon has very little that has been built with AI, built with Claude. We've got full Claude licenses, but I do think AI will have a bit of a reckoning, and it is already in Amazon. They're putting in new systems to stop code getting. They've got to have more discerning functionality, QA functionality, to stop code getting onto the website. So AI, yes, is very helpful, but as a software development agency, I do again agree with Gordon that there'll be a lot of people who are building apps, but there's going to be this wall where that app can't scale anymore, and then it's a complete re-engineering of the app to make it scalable. The whole of Site Beacon's architecture is built for scaling, so we can scale it very easily. So I do think there's a lot of AI building things that are, I don't know how well they'll do for investors, but there will be a point where it needs to be re-engineered to go to the next level. And how much is that re-engineering going to cost?
Yeah, no, and I think there's always a narrative behind a narrative. So, for example, the other day, maybe last week, Meta announced that they were slashing, 16,000 jobs. But what nobody looks at is that is impacting, their stocks positively, right? So they announced that they're slashing jobs and say, oh, it's the they're blaming AI, but it's not really that. It's like, but the headlines and I think the misunderstanding in general, which is a big topic that people don't understand in depth. I mean, I don't understand, but I talk to experts like yourselves. So you build technologies, Gordon. You have been building technologies forever. It's not that trivial, right? It's not obvious, but the headlines they sell, and a lot of people, they just like, again, Murdoch. They're just going to look at the headline and they're going to buy into that, and that's it, right? So,
yeah, I mean, as we talked about at the start, when you're only there to impress investors, or you're only there to look after investors, Meta or whoever it is, it's easy to hide a load of layoffs behind it's all about AI doing the coding, when actually, maybe it's time for another, a time to re-engineer your business. Meta are dropping, or no, they not necessarily, but Meta are moving away from the world of VR a little bit.
Yeah.
So what is the real story behind it? Sometimes it's easy to say, and I, like I say, having used all of the coding tools that are ever out there, we've got a massive budget to keep using them, testing them. There's no way we'd let a junior loose on any of them at all. It's helpful for seniors, juniors. It's just dangerous. You just end up with junk and technical debt and needing to re-engineer things. So I'm with you, Carlos. I think a lot of this might be an easy PR story as opposed to
yeah. Well, we have to wrap up, Gordon. Perhaps my final question is, what's one thing I didn't ask you today that I should have asked you?
I think one thing I was going to say about using AI, there are too many people out there who basically, especially sort of students or whatever, who literally just ask ChatGPT to write something and then stick it out, and it's such a giveaway, and it's so obvious that it's been written by an AI. I mean, I use AI as a partner, effectively a collaborator, and I think that's the clever way to use AI. So, for example, I mean, I come up with an idea for a sort of a Dreams of Electric Sheep installment. I'll draft something. I use Perplexity actually, which I'm kind of a big fan of. I was kind of involved with Perplexity, and it gives me access to, all the sort of top models. So I put it through that and say, look, what do you think of this? And it'll come back, and then you go backwards and forwards. So use AI as a collaborator, and also ultimately, before you put something out, you personalize it. So you take out, anything that is clearly sort of AI. So in other words, use it as a collaborator, use it for AI for ideas. And I think if you use an LLM on that basis, it's actually very, very useful and very helpful. But too many people, I think, don't really understand that. They kind of think it was written by AI. So I would say, in terms of anyone who's doing any writing or documents or whatever, use it as your collaborator, but don't basically give it the final say.
Fantastic. Gordon, appreciate your time today. Stuart, thank you very much for joining us. Last minute. Gordon, if I mean, in the club, we're gonna make sure that we're gonna promote this. We're gonna create a carousel there, something new. Also, we're promoting more our expert sessions and experts. But for who's watching this on LinkedIn, we are live there on the Evolve channel. How people can get in touch and learn more about yourself and what you're building. Maybe they want to invest as well. They're curious, as long as they're not wasting your time, as you mentioned. Like they're not selling a list. Let's put it this way.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I really enjoyed this. I'm also really happy and up for, you talk about advisory, helping companies where I can, and as you know, I've got a lot of experience in a lot of different areas. So I'm happy to sort of, conversations with anyone who sort of thinks, well, actually, have you got some thoughts? Maybe you could help us. If that is of interest, get in touch.
Awesome. So, ladies and gents, this was Gordon Robson today and Stuart as a co-host. Thank you all. See you next week.
Thanks, Carlos.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay. Cheers.